Why is Sri Lanka's economy subtly collapsing? Now, this may come as a surprise to many in the West, but this island nation off the coast of India was actually in the middle of an economic boom until just a few years ago. With beautiful beaches for tourism, a lush agricultural landscape, vast deposits of rare and valuable gemstones, and a highly literate and skilled workforce, Sri Lanka has all the makings of a strong and growing economy. But for much of its history, the only thing holding the island nation back was the lack of a stable government. And that's because Sri Lanka was in the grips of a major civil war between the central government and the Tamil Tigers for over 25 years, with the conflict ultimately killing more than 100,000 people, displacing nearly 1 million more, and inflicting over $200 billion worth of damage on the island. Much of the northern part of the island lay in ruins at the end of the Civil War in May 2009. But in the decade that followed, Sri Lanka's economy not only recovered, but prospered. Drawn to the island's world-famous beaches, and with the threat of armed conflict now over, tourism to the island grew by over 400%. Other sectors of the economy grew as well, most notably the country's world-famous tea and gemstone industries. From 2010 to 2018, Sri Lanka's economy grew by an average of nearly 6% per year, making it one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. And yet, in the span of less than 2 years, it would all fall apart. At the same time COVID was wrecking the island's tourism industry, the central government was also destroying its agricultural industry. In April of 2021, the president of Sri Lanka announced that the government would only allow organic farming, banning most forms of fertilizer. And in just 6 months, the island's world-famous tea and rice industries were decimated. The tea industry alone lost over $400 million, while rice production fell by 20%. Making matters worse, these twin problems exposed a third crisis. Long before either the arrival of COVID or the government-imposed transition to organic farming, Sri Lanka had been veering towards a sovereign debt crisis. The problems began when politicians started building infrastructure projects as a means to boost their popularity, even when those projects were not necessary. And when traditional sources of funding for the latest megaport or skyscraper were no longer available, the Sri Lankan government first turned to the Communist Chinese Party and later to the money printers. By 2022, a sovereign debt bomb began to unravel across the country. In April, the government defaulted on over $50 billion worth of debt. In June, Sri Lanka's prime minister declared that the country's economy had completely collapsed. Inflation soon skyrocketed to over 69% as the country was pushed to the brink of revolution. The story of Sri Lanka's economic crisis is all too familiar. Faced with the pressures of winning elections and delivering on promises to grow the economy, create new jobs, and expand government services, the country's political class believed that as long as their intentions were good, they could ignore basic economic principles like supply and demand, not to mention the dangers of debt and inflation. But as F.A. Hayek once warned, the curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design.